ways of conveying your thoughts, your ideas, your concepts, your message based on the reaction and response that you want your audience to get. A lot of these deeper psychological triggers and tactics aren't, they're not apparent. Right? It's like, so there's so much going on right here in this one little ad from beginning to end, from top to bottom, that the average individual, even the average marketer, is totally unaware of. Well, by the end of this boot camp, you're going to be able to go back. I have this slide again in the end. You're going to be able to go back and go through this ad, and you're going to be aware of everything that's being done from beginning to end. Why it's worded the way it is, why it's being conveyed the way it's being conveyed in terms of language, wording, phraseology. And so there is enormous power in the little nuances of language. Now, I once heard Dan Kennedy say something that has direct implication or application to you. And really, certainly for this boot camp, but for every training, every idea, every concept that I share with you, or every concept that you're exposed to. And Dan said in so many words that any moron can come up with lots of different reasons, quote unquote, to invalidate ideas. It doesn't take a wizard to come up with reasons to invalidate an idea. And so there's no, don't give yourself a pat on the back for figuring out how to invalidate an idea for your business, for your niche, for your product, for your service. Dan said, and this is so true, the only real value, the only real genius, the only real wizardry is in figuring out how to apply an idea, not how to invalidate it. And so it's my job today to share with you the most effective email persuasion and conversion triggers. It's your job today not to invalidate them, but to think through the application within your business, for your product, for your service, for your niche. So without further ado, let's just jump in and get rolling. And so the first trigger is what I call the Gary Halbert weird opener tactic. And this is very simple and very straightforward, right? And it starts with you using an oddball, unique, interesting, different idea to capture the attention of your readers, of your audience, of your prospects, and then to use that oddball idea to segue into your primary message, right? And this is one of the simplest of all of the tactics, of all of the triggers. And the reason why this works is because it doesn't start where the typical marketer, the typical company communicating with your prospect begins. Right? It's different. It stands out. It's interesting. But we use that interesting point to segue into your message. This is a quote from Gary Halbert. He said, one of the primary ways to use interesting facts in your copy, and that's email copy, that's sales letter copy, that's VSL copy, that's copy for a webinar, whatever, is to use these interesting facts, these unique concepts, these oddball ideas, use them to segue into your message. Segue meaning that it's a smooth transition from one part of a presentation to another. He said, remember that the formula for success in marketing and sales success is AIDA, right? Is attention, interest, desire, action. And so the first thing that needs to be done is you need to get their attention. And so what this method utilizes is it utilizes an oddball subject line and then an oddball lead in your email before you go into your body copy of the email. And so let me give you some examples straight from Gary Halbert. This is an example of how he started off, the start of a letter. And so in this case, the subject line, could have something to do with, McDonald's stock, right? And so it says 100 shares of McDonald's stock is worth $2,250 was worth $2,250 when it was first offered in 1965. Was worth more than $1.4 million 30 years later in 1995. That sounds great, doesn't it? But if you had held on to those same 100 shares for another 8 or 9 years, you would find them to be worth only $2,400. This is an excellent illustration of why timing in the stock market is everything. See, now this is an example of Gary would then go into. It was that tie-in line right there. This is an excellent illustration of why timing in the stock market is everything. That's how Gary would then segue into his message about timing in the stock market. This one isn't such an oddball, right? Because it has to do with, McDonald's stock, but you can use this as the start of anything that has to do with timing. Right? So I could take this oddball lead-in, or this type of oddball lead-in with this, 100 shares of McDonald's stock, and I can use this as the lead-in for any email that I want to send out about timing. If I want to talk about timing in a marketing funnel, if I want to talk about timing in as it relates to growing tomatoes, or timing when it comes to your nutrition, I'd be able to do that, right? Because we would simply say this is an excellent illustration of how timing is everything. For example, timing with your nutrition, right? And then we would be able to go into our whole message about nutrition. Here's another one, right? This one starts out with the dollar sign is a combination of the letters P and S, which is the abbreviation for pesos, which was the principal coin in circulation in the United States until 1794. After that, we began marketing our own dollars. Right now, a real peso used as Mexican currency is only worth about 9 American cents. And you know what? Most Americans earn so little compared to what they should be earning, they might as well be getting paid in pesos. And that's a shame, because with just a few simple secrets, anyone with average intelligence can increase their income dramatically. Here's how. So Gary was able to use this whole oddball idea of the dollar sign and tie in this idea of the pesos, right, with this thing that, look, most Americans earn so little they should be earning. They might as well be earning, getting paid in pesos. And then he was able to use that as a segue. And here's another one. We don't need to read this, but obviously, look at this. It starts off with, the man who commissioned the Mona Lisa refused it. That man was just one of the millions of people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And then he goes on, he talks about, I'll just read it. He reminds me of the people who think they're getting a bargain when they buy a cheap air purifier. Actually, it's just the opposite. They're not getting a bargain. And then he goes on to lead into, that's why I want to tell you a few facts about the new ionic air purifier sold by Sharper Image. Look at this. This was an email about the lead about Mona Lisa. And he was able to use it. And the same over here that, again, the original package of M&Ms contained brown, yellow, orange, red, green, violet color candies. The red ones were taken out of the mix in 1976. This is not because they contain red dye number 2. It was because company officials were afraid customers would think it did contain that dye. This illustrates the fact that very often people's perception of what is true is more important than what is actually true. That's why you need to read my new book titled The Secrets of How Successful People Look, Dress, and Act. Right? So think about the application in your world and how you could use something like this M&M lead and other weird leads. Let me show you an example from a promotion that I did, and this was that we did a handful of years ago in the chiropractic arena. I started out, and granted I put chiropractic in the title, but I said chiropractic voyeurism. And then I started out with the definition of voyeurism from Wikipedia. And all I did was just lead with the definition from Wikipedia. And then I said that's how Wikipedia defines voyeurism. In today's essay, I want to share with you a form of voyeurism that actually works to get you new chiropractic patients. And it went on to talk about, observing patients in terms of what they do and how they think from a marketing perspective. And so you see how I was able to take an oddball concept and tie it in with my message. This was another one that I sent out, and the subject line was about my daughter Sammy. And it started off with, my wife and I just made a big decision, and it should give you something as a chiropractor to seriously ponder. And then I went on to tell a story about my about my daughter, right? So she's 12 years old. She plays competitive volleyball. She plays for a particular club. And then I said, we drive over 40 minutes to travel. We pay X amount of dollars, blah, blah, blah. So what does this have to do with you and your practice? Well, let me ask you, how many patients or prospective patients happily travel out of their way for your practice, right? And is there a clear and powerful reason why you should be the logical choice for people to travel to, and so on? And so, I used more of, and this emails you're going to see later on falls into a couple of different categories because it's a story-based email. There's also, there's a lesson in this story, but it was different from what the typical marketer was using. And so very, very simple, weird facts, oddball ideas, oddball concepts in the subject line, in the lead-in, and that sometimes can be just a paragraph, it can be 2 paragraphs, and then a segue into your content. Now, I included this next slide just today because I want to show you the wrong way to do this. I just got this email, I think, yesterday, and this is arguably the most offensive email I have ever received in the last decade plus, 12 years, whatever it is, that I've been doing this. This is an example of somebody who is trying to use the weird opener tactic by starting with, this Revenge of the Jew. I'm baffled that this marketer sent this out. It's ludicrous, but I wanted to show you this because this is the wrong way to do it, right? And so he starts off by talking about his, as crazy as it sounds, he loves the Jewish people, but they're really known for being tight, otherwise known as Jewish. He's got a Jewish friend, all nonsense. But then he tries to use this as a lead-in for if you want a good deal, then you should take advantage of his offer, right? And so instead of just rolling with a straight discount offer, like discount, and then, hey, there's a discount on my product right now, he used this to get attention and then use this oddball, as disgusting as this is, this oddball concept that he was presenting as the segue in for his main message. And so that is trigger number 1. Trigger number 2, many of you are especially those of you that have been around my training for any significant length of time, have heard me share many times before. This is one of the go-to strategies, one of the go-to tactics that we use throughout almost every single marketing funnel, every single marketing campaign. And that's this tactic of the pluralized verb. And what you'll see is that oftentimes when you pluralize the verb in your marketing, it conveys to the prospect that the work is being done by the system that you're presenting, the method that you're presenting, the trick that you're presenting, the technique, the process, whatever it is. Right? See, this, I first learned about this many, many years ago when I came across, I think it was a campaign, an ad that was created originally, I think it was for TDK, the cassette manufacturer. And they ran an ad, and the ad was, the original ad said, put music in your life. Put music in your life. And the story goes that they ran the ad, again, and there was a mistake in the submission of the copy. And instead of saying put music in your life, it said puts music in your life. And the addition of that one letter, the addition of that S, as the story goes, jacked response through the roof. I've heard upwards of 400%. Well, the reason why, the psychology behind this is that when the verb is not plural, put music in your life conveys that you have to do the work. It's something for you as the prospect to do, right? And so in a prospect's mind, it requires effort. It requires me to do something. Well, when you pluralize the verb, it suggests that the product, the service, what's being offered does the work. So for example, there's a huge difference between saying strip 10 pounds of body fat in 3 days. strip 10 pounds of body fat in 3 days. This is something for me to do, right? It's, it's use this exercise program, use this diet, follow this diet, take these pills, and strip 10 pounds of body fat in 3 days. It's very different from saying that it strips 10 pounds of body fat in 3 days, right? There's a big difference just from that one S, because strips 10 pounds of body fat in 3 days conveys that the pills are doing it, that it's, the exercise machine that's doing it. It's the method that you're presenting that's doing it. Same thing with, build 7 pounds of muscle in 4 weeks. Builds 7 pounds of muscle in 4 weeks, right? Generate an extra 10,000 this month. It generates an extra 10,000 this month. What happens from the addition of this S, from the pluralizing of the verb, is this is talking about something that you're going to do. This is talking about something that the product is going to do. And so when you pluralize the verb, the benefit, the psychology here is that it implies that the benefit is given, or the result occurs thanks to the product, not thanks to the prospect. And oftentimes, anytime we can pluralize the verb, when it makes sense to do that, we pluralize the verb. And so one of the things to think about is as you're going through, or one of the things to look at is as you're going through your copy and you're seeing these singular verbs, you want to look to see if you can pluralize that verb, if it applies, right, if it makes sense. And you might have to restructure the start of the sentence a little bit, but when you do, the psychological impact is very, very different. This is one of those little tiny nuances that make a huge difference in copy. And so that's simple trigger number 2. Simple trigger, or trigger number 3, is what I call the teaching parable tactic. And the teaching parable tactic is really exactly what it says. It's the use of a story or a parable or a fable to communicate a message, to communicate a concept, to demonstrate proof for something, to prove a point, right? It's the use of story to communicate something. Now, you can use story, and you should use stories as much as possible in your marketing, because they are one of the most powerful tools that you can use, right? People naturally pay attention to stories. You're able to deliver messages and ideas in the context of the story, and so they are received by your prospects very differently, right? Their filter isn't up. As well, one of the best uses of the teaching parable, for example, is to convey something that would be extremely rough coming from you, right? And so if you hypothetically wanted to point out that, when prospects hem and haw, that, they end up, with nothing, or if you want to point something out that if you came out directly and said it, that it could potentially be insulting or harsh or come across as just brash, well, a great way to communicate that message is with story. And oftentimes we will use a story, a legitimate story, not a fictional story, but a legitimate story, to convey a message. But you can also leverage, like I said, parables, fables, short stories. For example, this is an example of a fable, the man, the boy, and the donkey. And so this is something that you could share. Now, this is a little bit long, and so I'm going to show you, here's another one that's a little bit shorter. But so each of these stories, each of these fables have lessons that they're conveying. And so, for example, on this one over here, this is the story, this little fable conveys this idea that, if you try to please everybody, you'll please nobody, right? So now look, you could certainly in an email just come right out and say this to prospects, right? That look, if you try to please everybody, you're going to end up pleasing nobody, right? Like, this is a great lesson this little parable, this is a great lesson for marketers, for each and every one of you, each and every one of us on this boot camp, right? Because as a marketer, you're not trying to please everybody. If you try to please everybody, you end up becoming plain vanilla to everybody. You end up becoming completely forgettable, right? And so the goal is not to have everybody, or not try to have everybody be a fan, not try to appease everybody, not try to make everybody on your email list like you, but your goal is to attract the right prospects and repel the wrong prospects. And so, right, so I could have an email that conveys this, that delivers this fable, or one similar, or a similar story that conveys this lesson, and then go from here and segue into, so what does this mean for you as a marketer? Well, quite simple. And then give the lesson, right? And so, so lessons in your stories, using stories to communicate things that you either don't want to communicate outright, or that would be better or more well accepted within the context of a story. This is an example of just a story that I told. Online income, this was the subject line, online income with glow-in-the-dark mini golf. And I started out by saying, now also what I want you to notice is in the dark, with glow-in-the-dark mini golf. And so this we're going to come back to. You're going to see this with, an unexpected tidbit in the subject line. But then I go on to tell a story. I said, what's the saying? What's the saying? I think it's something like the things that come out of the mouth of babes last night. And then I go into a story. My older daughter, Sammy, blurted something out during a round of glow-in-the-dark mini golf. Now, what's this doing? First of all, again, it's a story. And so this whole concept of glow-in-the-dark mini golf, right? First of all, there's, just as a quick aside, there is a benefit right here, right? Or an implied benefit, online income, because this was going out to internet marketers. And then there was this whole curiosity factor. Well, what does this have to do with anything, this glow-in-the-dark mini golf? And then I start out with a story. Like I said, people have been trained to pay attention to stories, to be engaged with stories. And so I start out with a sentence. And by the way, if you look at this sentence, you'll see that they have to keep reading. This is what we call, right, creating a slippery slope, creating that greased chute, as some people call it. They have to continue reading. What's the saying? I think something like, well, in order to finish that thought, they have to read the next sentence. The things that come out of the mouth of babes. And so now they have to keep reading to find out, well, what is the relevance of that? Why are you even sharing that? And then I go right into this story. Last night, my older daughter, Sammy, 12. Now, let me just stop for 1 second and share with you something that's going on here that's outside the scope of these triggers. It's something that I've talked about in other programs, but one of the things that you want to do throughout your email campaigns, throughout your marketing in general to your house list, is you want to bond with them. You want to establish a relationship with them. You want them to begin to feel as if they know you more and more the longer they remain on your list, right? Because remember that people buy from people that they like and trust, right? And so they like and trust you, that they have some kind of rapport with you. As well, people will come to you for the benefits that they perceive that they can get from you, but they'll stay around long term because of the relationship that they perceive that they have from you. Well, one of the keys to building that relationship is self-disclosure, is disclosing aspects about your life, your personal life, things that you're comfortable with, that give your prospects, give people on your list greater insight into who you are, that take you from this nebulous, who is this person behind the computer, to a real live person, a real live human being that they can relate to, that can relate to them. And so I give disclosure, right? I gave her name for a reason. I gave her age for a reason. More disclosure. And so she blurted something out during a round of glow-in-the-dark mini golf that so nails a mistake lots of marketers make when looking at their marketing metrics. Now, this was, as you're gonna see more about later on, this is our first open loop really in this email, because they need to keep reading to find out this mistake over here. And so I don't tell them what that mistake is right here. I just continue with the story. It was me, Samantha, my younger daughter, Gabriella, more self-disclosure over here, and a buddy of mine with his 3 kids. Now, I also shared this just as a side note for you so that you understand, because I shared, I was with a buddy of mine and his 3 kids, because what this is disclosing is that I go out with my kids. Right? They can picture in their mind me and my 2 daughters and my buddy and his 3 kids playing miniature golf, right? And it's something that a normal dad would do, an average individual would do. It's something that conveys that I'm a father, that I care about my kids, that I talk about my kids, that I enjoy being with my kids. Self-disclosure. We were at some place called Shipwrecks, an indoor backlight mini golf and arcade joint in Lake Park, Florida. A little bit more disclosure and detail in the story. Right? So there's detail being shared in this story, and it's the detail that makes it, that demonstrates its authenticity, right? This isn't just some random story. This demonstrates authenticity, and it's something that, it sucks them in even more because they see that it's real. They feel that it's real. And so we were on hole 13. Now, mind you, all this, I opened up this loop over here, and it's still not closed. We were on hole 13, which had the typical windmill obstacle, right? More just detail, smack dab in the middle of the green. And one after another, all the kids hit the ball and whack. They'd hit one of the blades on the windmill, leaving the ball on the wrong side of the green. That's when Sammy said, and then I have just a side note, dialogue. Anytime that you can work dialogue into a story, it makes it more engaging. And so I said, I said exactly what my daughter said. You guys are all aiming for the windmill. You should be aiming for the hole. She was so right. They were focusing on the wrong thing and not looking at the real goal. Then here is the segue. This is the same thing lots of marketers do with their marketing metrics. For instance, many marketers get caught up in the conversion rate of their squeeze page, simply looking at what percentage of visitors to that page opt in, when instead they should be looking at the EPC, earnings per click, on those visitors. And it continues here. The overall scheme of things, conversion rate, and then it goes through this whole thing, right? And so I use this as a unique hook. I use this as a way to pique curiosity. I use this as a story that conveyed the lesson, like, because people say, yeah, that's right, you shouldn't be aiming for the blade, you should be aiming for the hole. It's something that they can picture in their mind. And then right here was that segue point that allowed me to segue into my message, which was that I wanted to communicate with them that, what's more important than your conversion rate on your squeeze page is knowing how much you paid per lead, right? And how much you earn per lead. And so, of course, look, I could have started off by just talking about this. I could have started out by talking about, what's the most important metric, and then just went right into it. But that's common. That's average. That's typical. That's plain vanilla. And so this is how you get attention. This is how you bond. This is how you deliver a message. This is how you get buy-in for what it is that you want to communicate. You're still going to communicate the same thing that you want to communicate, but you're going to grab attention, maintain engagement. And look, so you understand, the more they read, the deeper they get in, the greater the likelihood of them completing your email. And so completing your message. That goes for a long form sales letter. That goes for email copy. The more they read, the greater the likelihood that they're going to complete reading it. And so look, what we're doing is we're creating this, we're getting attention, we're creating engagement, we're getting them involved, right? So the more they're reading, the greater the likelihood of them completing this. And we are delivering a story. And so that is another example for you. Now, number 4 is the manufactured logic tactic. And this is awesome, right? This is awesome. I did not come up with this, but this is phenomenal. So manufactured logic is really what appears on the surface to be a logical argument to your prospects, but it's really not. In other words, it's logic that you manufactured. It's the way in which you are conveying your message. And so let me give you an example of this, right? So and this is totally made up, but let's say that this was real. Most car mechanics are cigarette smokers. And this is ridiculous. I'm giving you a ridiculous example to start with, just so that you can really see this. But most car mechanics are cigarette smokers. Cigarette smokers die young. Therefore, if you don't want to die young, you won't become a car mechanic. Right? Now, like, it's ridiculous, this example, because it's clearly a flaw, right? In logic. It's clearly, it's a goof. I wrote this as a goof for you. But what you can see is that this is manufactured logic. Let me show you another example. So this one says, and this one is legitimately one that could be used, right? So struggling marketers don't segment their email lists. The most successful marketers use extensive list segmentation. Therefore, if you want to become a successful marketer, you need to learn how to properly segment your email list, right? Struggling marketers don't segment their email lists. Now, let me take a step back and explain something to you. That each of these statements on their own could be true, but when presented like this, it's being presented in a way that this becomes the accepted conclusion of this prior stuff. So struggling marketers don't segment their email lists. That's true. The most successful marketers use extensive list segmentation. That's true. If you want to become a successful marketer, you need to learn how to properly segment your email list. That's true. What makes this manufactured logic is by adding in this word therefore. Therefore, what's followed after this, the message is that because of this, this is true. Well, let me show you something, and I'm going to show you this in another context as well. That this is not necessarily, the thing that I want you to get is that all these are true, but the fact that the most successful marketers use extensive list segmentation in no way means that the extensive list segmentation that they are using was responsible for them becoming successful. Maybe all these people became successful and then started using extensive list segmentation. Or maybe they were using the extensive list segmentation and it had nothing to do with them becoming successful. But the way it's presented in here is this is manufactured logic, right? And so let me give you another example of this. This is another example of manufacturing logic. And again, this is totally made up. Over 83% of the people who live to 90 years plus eat more than 6 servings of vegetables a day. The majority of people who pass on before the age of 60 eat less than 3 servings per day. Therefore, if you want to extend your lifespan, you must be on a meal plan high in vegetables. Right? So let me show you something. So I could use this manufactured logic if I was selling a program on how to segment your list. I could use this as manufactured logic if I was selling a meal plan or a diet that was based on high vegetables or vegetarian diet. And of course, I could have made this whatever I want. I could say, therefore, if you want to extend your lifespan, you must consume more vegetables, or you must be sure to get all of the common nutrients found in vegetables. Well, that's not necessarily the case. This is manufactured logic because, look, what I want you to understand is that this might be true. Let's say it is, that over 83% of the people who live to 90 years plus eat more than 6 servings of vegetables per day. But that might have nothing to do with it. That doesn't mean that this is responsible for why they live to this age. That could legitimately be just a coincidence. Right? It's like saying, over 83% of the people who live to 90 years plus live in Florida. and the majority of people, therefore, if you want to extend your lifespan, you need to live in a warm climate or something like that. Well, that might not mean anything. Those people could have moved to Florida at 75 years old or moved to a warm climate at 75 years old. But what we're doing is we are constructing a message that is implying that these things prove this. And again, it's this use of the word therefore. And we can replace this word with, what that means for you, or what that means is that, if you want to. By saying therefore or what that means, we are saying and implying that this proves this. And so this is the kind of thing that you can be aware of this. And you should be aware of this. You should certainly be using this when appropriate. And this isn't a lie, but it's not necessarily the case. And you're going to understand a deeper psychological trigger in just a bit where you can really see this at play. But you should be using this in your email when needed, right? And because this, right, when we say that, you should be on a meal plan high in vegetables, this is serving as a proof point. It's manufactured logic. It's manufactured, but it is serving as a proof point for this claim over here. And be aware of this, because you will see this type of manufactured logic where, if you really look at it in the world, in advertising, in marketing, in general, even on the news, where it's not necessarily, that, they're doing this like, it can almost be flawed logic, but the point is it's manufactured, right? And so we're using legitimate points. I made these up just for you, but we're using legitimate points to convey this message that is plausible, but it becomes accepted as a fact. This is not questioned. This, therefore, what comes after. And so that is trigger number 4. Trigger number 5 is something that I first learned from Clayton Makepeace. And this is a way of articulating your product or service features and benefits on a deeper level. And this is the FAB formula. FAB stands for features, advantages, and benefits. And so an FAB statement, a feature, advantage, benefit statement, it explains the feature. It tells what the feature is. It tells what that feature does, right? Which is the advantage. What that feature does is the advantage, and then how it benefits the prospect. Features, of course, as hopefully each and every one of you know, features are facts, characteristics, aspects about your product or service, right? It's not about the prospect, it's about your product or service. When you're talking about a facet of your product or service, you're talking about a feature. An advantage, like I said, is what the feature does. And then, of course, the benefit tells the prospect why they should value that advantage. In other words, what is the benefit exactly, right? What is the benefit of that advantage? It's what connects the facts about your product to the solution that your prospect is looking for. So here's kind of how this works, and then I'll give you an example. It works that, because your product has X feature, you'll be able to do Y. And what that means for you is A, right? Or ABC. And so because it has this, you'll be able to advantage. And what that means for you is this. So we could say, for example, because it has a word for word transcript, you will be able to read and reread and reference back over the material as often as you want. You see, now that's where the average marketer stops. The average marketer really thinks that the advantage is the benefit. Now, those of you that have gone through the MFA program, those of you that are MTAM members, those of you that have gone through any of my trainings, you have heard me talk about many times before the benefit of the benefit. You'll hear me on, consult Q&A calls talking about what is the benefit of that. Because oftentimes what marketers think is the benefit is not really the benefit. For instance, a marketer might say, because it has a word for word transcript, you'll be able to go back, reference through it, go through it anytime you want at your own convenience. Well, that's not the benefit, right? And so that is the advantage. And what that means for you, right, is that you're only 1 second away from getting your answer, or, we would spell out what that advantage does for the prospect. And so here are just some questions for you to get you really thinking about the advantage. Why might the feature be advantageous? What does it mean for him or her, the prospect? What does it offer, and why might he like it, right? So again, because it has the feature, you'll be able to do the advantage, and what that means for you is benefit. Here is an example from Kevin Clark, right? And so our sleeping bags have a 1-inch layer of insulation. This helps to retain body heat on cold nights. You'll be warm all night, which means that you'll get great sleep and be well rested for a day of fun activities that you'll fully enjoy. So what you can see here is that our sleeping bags have a 1-inch layer of insulation on them. That's the feature. The advantage is that this helps to retain body heat on cold nights. So you'll be warm all night. What is the benefit? The benefit is you'll get, right, which means that you'll get a great sleep. You'll get great sleep and be well rested for a day of fun activities that you'll fully enjoy. That is feature, advantage, benefit right there. Feature, advantage, benefit. Number 6. This one is also awesome. This is what I call the faux science tactic. And the faux science tactic is really kind of very similar to what we previously talked about. It's almost like it's what is sometimes referred to as false evidence. And so let me give you an example of how this works. So 6 out of 10 best-selling books are, and this is made up, 6 out of 10 best-selling books are published by a major publishing house. 67% of all tennis pros use an oversized Prince racket. More doctors recommend Tylenol than any other brand, and motorcycle accidents accounted for less than 1/10 the fatalities of automobile accidents. So let me show you what's going on here and how powerful this really is. So what does this imply, right? So when I say 6 out of 10, so let's say I would use something like this. If this was true, right, I'd get the actual number. 6 out of 10 best-selling books are published by a major publishing house. So if I was a major publishing house, or I was marketing a major publishing house, this is the type of tidbit that I would use. This is the type of faux science or, false evidence that I would use. Because what does this convey? This conveys that if you want to increase your chances of having a best-selling book, then you want to get your book published by a major publishing house. But that's not necessarily true. That is not necessarily true at all. Those best-selling authors, they might have just chosen to have their book published by a major publishing house. In other words, this faux science is conveying this idea that, look, 6 out of 10 best-selling books are published by a major publishing house. So if you want to increase your chances of having a best-selling book, you want to have it published by a major publishing house. But that's not necessarily the case. Those books could have been bestsellers if they were published under any company, right? This may just mean that the best authors migrate towards major publishing houses. But if those books were published under any author, under any publisher, they might have been bestsellers. See, so this is not what it conveys, is not actually accurate, or what is accepted by the prospect is not legitimately necessarily the case. It could be, but it's like, in other words, if we wanted to say, like, I might have no proof whatsoever that if you get your book published by a major publisher, that it will increase your chances of being a bestseller. But this little tidbit over here certainly conveys that, even though that's not necessarily the case. Just like over here, 67% of all tennis pros use an oversized Prince racket. So let's say I was selling Prince rackets. This would be the kind of tidbit that I use, right? Does this necessarily mean that if you use a Prince racket, that it will increase your chances of becoming a tennis pro? No. Maybe tennis pros switched to a Prince after they became pros. Or maybe these pros are simply paid by Prince to use their rackets. But it certainly has an implication over here that it is that it's this factual argument, just like this. And this one is the best. And this is when I first saw this years ago, this is when I really became aware of this whole concept of, faux science, of false evidence, right? And so you see this used, right? More doctors recommend Tylenol than any other brand, or more doctors recommend Tylenol than any other painkiller. And so what it conveys is that, well, wow, it's got to be good, right? It's got to be good. Doctors love it. They wouldn't be recommending it to all their patients if it wasn't good. And so it must be good, right? It's this implied endorsement. And so if more doctors recommend it, then it's got to be great. But the reality is that most people don't understand is that this is a piece of faux science because Tylenol is just in more hospitals than any other painkiller, right? And so it's in more hospitals than any other painkiller, and we have no idea what kind of samples or free goodies, free bottles, free pills that Tylenol gives to doctors. See, this is the kind of thing that Tylenol engineered this. Right? Tylenol engineered this. Just because more doctors recommend it doesn't mean anything. It just means that Tylenol, in this case, I know that it just means that Tylenol is in more hospitals, more medical facilities than any other brand. It just means that Tylenol is better at marketing their brand to doctors and getting doctors, whether it be incentivizing doctors or not, to recommend their brand. That's all this tells us, right? Is that Tylenol has done a better job of getting their brand, getting their product into doctors' hands than the other brands. This doesn't necessarily tell us that Tylenol is better, that it's safer, that it's more effective, but it certainly has that implication. And then the last one, motorcycle accidents accounted for less than 1/10 the fatalities of automobile accidents. This is a piece of faux science because on the surface, it conveys that motorcycles are safer than automobiles. It conveys that your likelihood of getting into an accident and dying on a motorcycle is far less than in an automobile, right? That's what this on the surface conveys. But what's not being shared in here is that there are far less motorcycles on the road, than there are automobiles. And so if we looked at what percentage of motorcyclists get into accidents compared to what percentage of automobile drivers get into accidents, we might find that it's significantly higher. A significantly higher percentage of motorcyclists get into accidents and die compared to automobile